Honourable members, the ayes are 61, the noes are 59. Part 2 will stand part. The question now is that Part 3 stand part. It's debate on clauses 59 to 62 and is to do with amendments to the Continental Shelf Act of 1964. The question is that before we've got some amendments, was a member seeking a call? Yes. I'm going to call Part 3 unless a member wants to call. Member wants to call? I call the Honourable Member Moana Maki.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. And Part 3 deals with amendments to the Continental Shelf Act. And of course, the Continental Shelf Act, this is part of the area where the government's got itself into quite a bit of controversy over the SOPs that they dumped on the public on Easter Sunday and on this House belatedly. Because currently any mining for minerals that is carried out on the continental shelf is carried out under the Continental Shelf Act 1964. And what this part does is it actually amends the Continental Shelf Act so that once this piece of legislation comes into force, it will now be the Crown Minerals Act that governs the mining of minerals and petroleum on the continental shelf. And this is where we once again have got ourselves into difficulty. Or the previous minister might want to take a call and give us the benefit of his wisdom, seeing as he was the drafter of this legislation initially, not the drafter of the dreadful SOP that we've dealt with to ban protest vessels. And I know that the Honourable Phil Heatley would never ever have stood for that as Minister of Energy. He was an upholder of people's rights, not a destroyer of rights, and that is how he, of course, will be remembered in terms of his legacy as a Minister of Energy. Unfortunately, his legacy as a Minister of Housing ain't so flash, but never mind, 1 out of 2 ain't bad. So coming back to Part 3 and the Continental Shelf Act, this is the area that we've been discussing in the House and in the media over the last week or so since the government announced that out in the high seas, which is where we find the exclusive economic zone and the continental shelf, that there are going to be limitations on the rights of people to legally protest against vessels and instalments that are on the continental shelf. And the reason that we have an issue with it is because this isn't about stopping illegal activity in the continental shelf at all. It's about making it as hard as possible for people to go out and to voice their concerns and protest about what is occurring in the continental shelf and in, of course, the exclusive economic zone. And the reason that's the case is because the changes that the government has made only apply to protest vessels and only apply to those that are protesting oil and gas. If this was about safety, if this was about stopping illegal activity, activity that would be illegal in our territorial waters, then the law change would apply to everyone. Well, this is happening in the continental shelf and for these activities. And what they've done is by putting it into the Crown Minerals Act, if it's in relation to a permit that is granted under the Crown Minerals Act, and currently those permits are granted under the Continental Shelf Act, and what we're doing now is transferring that across to the Crown Minerals Act. I think petroleum always existed under the Crown Minerals Act. But what happens is when one of these permits, which used to be granted under the Continental Shelf Act, is now granted under the Crown Minerals Act, that anyone who protests against the activity that permit is allowing and gets in the way or interferes with a vessel or a structure, they will now face significant penalties. And the question that we asked, and the question which was never answered by any of the government members or the ministers that gave speeches, was why would that not apply to everyone? Why is it only under those permits currently granted under the Continental Shelf Act that is now covered? Because now what we're saying is you've got within your territorial waters, it's a very important point, Mr Chair, within your territorial waters, an activity that's illegal, or that very same activity that occurs in the continental shelf under a permit currently carried out under the Continental Shelf Act, that very same activity will be allowed, unless it's protesting against oil and gas. But So what I'm saying is that this is focusing on the behaviour and on this particular permit that's been granted under this particular act. It's not focusing on the dangerous behaviour, which should apply to everyone, and should apply actually to those industry operators who have permits under the Continental Shelf Act. If they act dangerously or recklessly or in a way that would be illegal in our territorial waters, then why should they not face the same penalties? Yep. Why is, once again, the playing field being skewed so incredibly towards the petroleum and mineral extraction industry, but to everyone else and to every other industry that uses the continental shelf and that carries out activities there, they don't get the same protection of the law. And protesters who may be the target of some illegal activity that would be illegal in our territorial waters don't get the protection of the law. It's simply not fair, and it simply makes no sense, Mr. Chair, to not have it apply to everyone, and to only say, well, if you've got a permit under the Continental Shelf Act and that's now being transferred to the Crown Minerals Act, then we'll protect you, but everyone else, I'm sorry, we're not interested. We're not interested if people carry out dangerous and illegal behaviour against you.
I call the Honourable Member Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just take a brief call on this quite briefly.